Hello and welcome to another Game Nexus video. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Virtua Fighter, released in 1995 for the Sega Saturn. Now, this port often inspires a lot of controversy because there's no way of really saying this otherwise, is that this port of Virtua Fighter was just a rushed port in general because Sega was trying to rush this out for the Sega Saturn's launch. And it's evident if you look at a lot of the graphics how glitchy this game can be. Even if you saw in my intro video, the polygons that make up the characters sometimes will flicker in and out, and they just generally look a lot less stable than any other version of Virtua Fighter. Now, the way that this game was released, the Japanese version was released on November 22nd of 1994, followed by the North American version on May 11th of 1995, and then you have your European version released all the way on July 8th of 1995. And the only real upgrade per se on this version is it has a bit of an arranged soundtrack, which in a way sounds a little bit better, but unfortunately the gameplay doesn't feel as good. The AI is not too great if you ask me, because it tends to rubber band a little bit more than it really should. So you'll whiz through the first 4 characters or so, and then maybe 5, 6, 7. I know the one choke point that I generally face in this is Pai-chan. For some reason, the difficulty for her seems a bit over the top. So I don't know if it's a problem with the AI in this game or just this game in general, but... And if you saw what I meant there, especially in the replays, when Sarah was doing the replay there, a lot of her body actually just disappeared. And that's something, if you look closely at the gameplay every now and then, especially in replays, you will see that happen every now and then, that the graphics will glitch a little bit. But unfortunately, it's just due to the nature of this game, and as I said, if Sega had really taken their time on this port of their, well, I really can't say it's their signature series at this point, because you gotta realize, this was the very first game in the series, so it's kind of like saying, oh well, they should have known better for Tekken, or they should have known better for Dead or Alive. They never would have known any of those games would become such a big series, so they wouldn't know that, I guess, to treat their game with such dignity as to give it a proper port. But my thought is, if you're looking to show off this new fancy 3D console, you kind of want a game that's actually going to actually show it off. And unfortunately this really didn't. And in fact, from what I understand, the reason why Virtua Fighter Remix was even created was because so many fans were not pleased with how the Sega Saturn version of Virtua Fighter was so kind of glitchy. Virtua Fighter Remix kind of gave it that how do I want to say it? And I accidentally left the loss in there, but Virtua Fighter Remix kind of gave it that texture mapped look. But a lot of people will go on record and always say, oh well, Virtua Fighter Remix, that's the much better game. The original Virtua Fighter's terrible. But the problem that I always like to say is, for a lot of people, what you're seeing in front of you right now, this game is Virtua Fighter. There was no 32X. There was no arcade version. This poor example of a port of a very advanced 1993 arcade game is what they would call Virtua Fighter. When, regardless of how many frames per second or any nonsense about that, the graphics in the arcade version were a lot more advanced than this, but there was no way for the Saturn to pull off the same graphic fidelity unless Sega really knew what they were doing with the console, and of course, since it was brand new at the time, development was kind of new as well. And you know, hindsight's 2020. Had they took Virtua Fighter, ported it to the Sega Saturn at the very end when they're pulling out the most amazing graphics, I'm sure they could have had a really good port of Virtua Fighter. And if people were wondering about the PC version of Virtua Fighter, the PC version of Virtua Fighter is actually based off of Virtua Fighter Remix, and there's the classic graphics mode that kind of makes it look like this. But unfortunately, the PC version of Virtua Fighter is actually based off of the Sega Saturn version, and not based off of the arcade version. But then again, at the time, that's actually fairly common because it's fairly easy to take like a Sega Saturn game and port it to PCs. Because the one thing you have to remember is, even if like a PC could play this game Virtua Fighter the way it was in the arcades in 1993, I doubt Sega would really take the trouble to be like, you know what, we gotta take that arcade perfect version and port it to PCs, because you gotta realize, even like recently, personal computers and fighting games still aren't like the big thing. Most companies, when they're paying attention to like a port of a fighting game, it's more for the consoles, because they know that's really where their big player base is. So they're not going to like go out of their way and port the PC version and have it arcade perfect. Plus, there's always a chance at the time when Virtua Fighter was still getting ports that most people's PCs wouldn't have been able to run an arcade perfect Virtua Fighter, like rendered in Direct 3D or Glide or 3DFX or whatever they were using at the time. So they probably didn't see a point in bothering to port something in a way that nobody could really use. But as I said, the only real like bright point in Sega Saturn Virtua Fighter has to be a little bit of this remixed music. It sounds pretty good, but the simple thing that I like is the best music for Virtua Fighter has to be the arcade version, coming right off that original Model 1 soundboard. It just sounds great. 32X version had a decent rendition of the Virtua Fighter soundtrack, but of course, Model 1 is definitely where it was at, on that original soundboard, just playing all of the sounds and sound effects.
Fight 1. Ready, go!
And I can definitely say I do not like how most of the polygons look in this game. And it took me a while to actually do this gameplay, and after a while I just had to say to myself, you're gonna have a pretty high time due to how bad the AI can be in this game, so you might as well just get through it just to show off the Sega Saturn version, and then I will put Sega Saturn Virtua Fighter on my shelf and probably not play it again for a good while, because I can really come down and say I did not have a good time playing Sega Saturn Virtua Fighter. It's a terrible glitchy mess with over-the-top AI, and it just wasn't a pleasure to play with, especially how like rubber bandy, as I like to say. And one thing that I mention in a lot of my fighting game videos that the games tend to have is something I like to call ring out AI. If you even get close to that line on the side of the ring, the AI will be relentless trying to knock you out of the ring. No matter what they can do to knock you out of the ring, they will do it. So like, even if you're in one of the early rounds where they don't throw many combos, as soon as you get to the edge, they will redouble their efforts to knock you out of the ring. And like when it happens, it always feels like you really had to do that. Especially there were so many times when I would be ringed out in my various gameplay attempts, and I pretty much had destroyed the AI, and I made the mistake of getting a little bit too close to the edge of the ring, And yeah, the AI just poured it on, and they did everything they could and knocked me out of the ring. But would I recommend Sega Saturn Virtua Fighter? I definitely have to say no. Absolutely not. If you're going to play Virtua Fighter, due to the fact that it's just a much better playing game, either play the 32X version or the arcade version, either emulated or on real hardware. But I do not recommend the Sega Saturn version of the original Virtua Fighter, as it just tends to be a bit of a glitchy mess. The AI just has serious problems. It doesn't run as it really should, and a lot of the gameplay is just it's just a chore to get through, because the AI just seems like it's been thrown together so quickly that all the characters are just so cheap when they throw their moves at you. You're just like, oh my god, I just want this to be over so I don't have to play Sega Saturn Virtua Fighter anymore. But suffice it to say, unlike my 32X version, as you can guess, I had one early victory against Doral here, and yeah, it never happened again. So yeah, you can enjoy seeing me get beaten up by Doral. And if you didn't guess already by looking at the times in the other video, the intros video, I did not beat through Akira fast enough in order to get any high score, even like the lowest of the low. So you're not going to see that, but I would absolutely imagine it would look exactly the same as the 32X or the arcade version. I couldn't really see them reinventing the wheel and making the name entry screen look a little bit different. But yeah, Sega Saturn Virtua Fighter, it's a slog to get through. It's not a good game. I highly recommend playing either the 32X version, if you have that laying around at home, or if you can get your hands on the arcade version, or of course, it's emulated at this point in history, which is like mid-August 2020. It's emulated really well on MAME, so if you can't like play an original arcade cabinet or hardware like I have, then play Virtua Fighter arcade version on MAME. It's a really good experience, and it's not nearly as glitchy and barely thrown together like this version. Well, this has been another Game Nexus video, and I shall see you later. Bye.